Okay, good afternoon. If you can hear my voice, let's start making our way back to our seats and honor our time, and we will begin our final session for today. We'll have dinner and worship after this. We've got a great dinner for you tonight, as well as our worship band. You may have heard them if you were out in the hall. They're warming up. They're going to be amazing tonight, along with the Picardos preaching, and the bishop will be presiding over communion tonight, so you'll definitely want to be a part of that. Okay, we've got a couple more giveaways here, and before I'll introduce Samantha Lane here shortly, but I'm going to ask her to be my lovely, pull a name out of there. The first, this will be for a set of books.
Skip White.
Skip White. Skip White is the winner of The Storyteller Looks at the Parables by one Charles Maynard, and a copy of the Dynamite Prayer Book by the Picardos. You can probably get those autographed, each of those, so there you go. All right, let's draw for another set of books right here. Aaron Atchley. All right, another set of books. You get Fresh Expressions in a Digital Age and the Prayer Book, so there we go. All right, and now for, again, all of our door prizes are excellent, but this is one that's a little unique and different. This is, our Catholic friends have candles of, the Virgin Mary, other things. We have the patron saint of East Tennessee. This will be a candle of one Dolly Parton, as well as the Dolly Parton gift pack in here from our good friends at Rolla. Samantha helped procure this, so she definitely gets to draw for this. So who will win this? And you'll have to show it off to your friends afterwards. Steve Patterson. All right. We've got it.
For anyone who didn't win.
On behalf of a grateful nation, here is your Rolla Dolly Parton gift pack. So there you go. Okay, with that being said, we've concluded that. It is my honor and privilege to introduce to you, if you weren't in our elder session, this is your first introduction to her, but we're blessed to have Samantha Lane with us here today. Samantha Lane is the founder of Origami Day, a wonderful business that helps folks with time management, organization. She is an expert in those fields, and as we look at unleashing generosity, I think caring for ourselves, caring for our time, protecting that, and getting the most out of our lives is such an important aspect of generosity, and she's going to lead us in such a powerful way. So if you would, please welcome Samantha Lane to Holston Conference.
Thank you. Thank you. So, in theory, there are handouts that should be making their way to you. Okay, here they come. What you have here is a simple piece of paper. On one side, you'll see the days of the week, and on the other side, we're going to go old school, and I'm going to ask you to take notes throughout this session, because we actually remember more when we write it down. So we'll also use that front side to do an exercise together. So those are making their way to you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. And we are going to talk about time management today, and I'm super excited. Some of you were in the earlier session, so you got this disclaimer, but I'll go ahead and share this with those of you who are new to this. I spent most of my life in the Northeast and the Midwest, so I will refer to you as you guys for the duration of this time, so please do not be offended. I apologize. Also, sometimes I get excited to talk about time management, and I start to talk really fast. If you need me to repeat things, just raise your hand. These lights are very powerful, but I think I can see all of you. My goal is not to talk at you for the next hour and 15 minutes, but to talk with you. This is a really great topic. It's a deep well. We could cover more time management than we really have time for, ironically. So today we're really going to focus on what I would consider the most important tips, and I'm going to share them alongside a little bit about my story. So if we will get started, no one has any questions? I think sheets are making it to you. Awesome. So let's go. It all started for me in 2014 when I had to have my chest cut open. So I was 29 years old, and I was diagnosed with a chest wall deformity that left my sternum sitting on my heart and made it difficult for me to breathe. So the doctors said, to prevent further heart defects, we should cut you open. You'll be out of commission for 4 weeks, and then you'll be good to go. So I planned to be out of commission for 4 weeks. Unfortunately, plans changed, and 4 weeks post-surgery, I was not cleared to drive. 6 weeks post-surgery, I'd lost the ability to use my left arm, which I eventually regained. Thank you, physical therapy. And 12 weeks post-surgery, I was still battling a severe staph infection in my chest. So the experience was not what I planned for. It was something that I would not wish upon anyone else. But the good news about it was a blessing in disguise. It was part of God's plan, and it was one of the best things that could have happened for me because it really taught me the importance of our days. And one of my favorite quotes that I read during my recovery was by Annie Dillard, and she said, "How we spend our days is in fact how we are spending our lives." So let me say that to you again. How we're spending our day is how we are spending our life. So a lot of times we get so caught up in the minutia, get the kids to school, get the emails done, drop things off, go to the grocery store, and we forget that this is it. This is our life. This is our time here on this earth, and we should be living it in a way that is both peaceful and productive. So that's what I want to share with you today is how do we manage our time so we are being present in our lives while still being very productive. What's great about this group is you are people who have such impact in your work. So it's even more important for you to be able to be productive in your days because what you are doing has such a wonderful ripple out. Not to diminish anyone else's jobs, but there's just such power in this group. Unfortunately, you are also a group that likely has autonomy in your days, which means you're at higher risk for burnout. But it means we can manipulate the way you schedule your day so that you can, in fact, be more productive while being even more peaceful. So, any questions before we move on? Okay. I don't think I see any hands. Again, these are some powerful lights, so if I'm not catching you, feel free to do one of these. So we're going to start with tip number 1. And again, hopefully now everyone has received a note sheet, so we can go ahead and write down what speaks to you. There's a lot of research that says when we do too much PowerPoints, we don't really tune in, versus I might say something that is more powerful to you than what I would put on a PowerPoint slide, so I want you to go ahead and write that down and retain it for yourself. Sort of, I believe in leaving breadcrumbs for future you. What is future you going to want to remember? So the first tip that I learned was pretty much while I was sitting in a hospital bed. I remember this so clearly, this moment of realizing, oh my gosh, I think I'm dying. Like, this was not my plan. I was not prepared for this. I have done it so wrong. I was a workaholic. I thought that we were meant to go to school and get a job and work our days away, and that's what success looked like. And what I realized was that was not really what life was about. That I had sort of misunderstood. So it taught me, number one, the most important sort of message or tip where we start is you have to know what's important, right? Because when everything is important, nothing is important. There's many demands on our time, and we have to know what are our priorities, what really deserves our time. Because here's one of the harsh realities about time. It's finite. Sure, it's an infinite concept. But in our lives, it's finite. We only have so many hours in each day. We only have so many days on this earth. Sorry to be the one to remind you of that. We'll get through the darkness and we'll go up to more exciting things as we keep talking. But the reality is time is finite. So that really does necessitate a sense of prioritization with that limited resource. So what we're going to start with is one of my favorite tips or tools for time management, which is the Eisenhower Urgency Matrix. Has anyone heard of this before? I don't think I see any hands. Yes, 2 of you. Awesome. So we're going to go through this together. So what we have in this matrix is 2 axes that make up 4 quadrants. So we have important to not important, and we have urgent to not urgent. Perhaps that's more familiar now to some of you? Yeah. So we're going to fill this out together. Okay, so you're going to have to participate. So sorry, / you're welcome. So we're going to start with Quadrant One. These are the items in our life that are both important and urgent. Now, another disclaimer. There are not any hard and fast rules with this matrix. These are more just commonalities. So each of us may have something that one day is a Quadrant 1, a different day could be a Quadrant 2. It's just sort of how the demands for your time could be categorized in that moment. But there are some common things, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So can anyone give me an example of something that would be in your life or in your work that would be considered both urgent and important? Getting to work on time? Sure, yeah. So we're going to make that more broad, and we're going to call that a deadline, right? Because there's a certain time you have to be there. Great example. Sick child. Love that. Okay, I mean, I don't love the sick child. I love the example. It's excellent. So we are going to call that unforeseen. Or, yeah, unforeseen, unplanned. Okay, great example. What else? Completing what? Remodeling projects. Okay, so that's urgent, it needs attention right now, and it's important. Okay. So let's think about a broad scoop we can put that in. So what would make it urgent? A busted pipe. Okay, yeah, I'd put that in the unplanned category. So let's put that broadly, and we're going to put that in, we're going to call that basic needs. So like food, shelter, right? A busted pipe, a home project, that falls into our hierarchy of basic needs. Does that make sense? Paying bills. That's going to go here with deadlines. Bills. Great. Any other thoughts? These are great examples. Date night. I love that you put that in Quadrant One. So I see that it's important. Well, can you help me understand how it's urgent? Okay. Okay, so no, that's okay. We can work with that. We're going to call that an emergency. So emergencies there's a lot of things that could fall into the emergency bucket, and perhaps a relationship SOS is something that needs to be addressed. So we'll call this emergencies, and emergencies could be a ton of different things. Perhaps that sick child that we talked about earlier could go into an emergency category, or a flat tire, or sickness, those sort of things that we just couldn't have planned for, and they truly are emergencies. Now, I'll go ahead and share with you, I chose earlier in my life to marry for love, and so I'm married to a fireman. So I sort of sealed my fate to work forever, which is part of this whole journey of learning, okay, we know what's important, but how on earth do we still work and still find joy? But with that, it also gave me a really good understanding of emergencies. So past me, the workaholic version of me, she was often stressed out about, like, I've got to get this proposal in, or like, I'm running late for this meeting, or like, oh, I spilled coffee on my shirt. And those were emergencies to me. Thankfully, I now spend a lot more time communicating with my husband, and I call him up and I tell him all these things, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, how was your day? And he's like, oh, it's fine. We just went to a fire and someone lost their family pet. And I'm like, oh, that's more of an emergency. And so I think it's really good for us to have perspective as we identify our priorities, because it's so easy to get caught up in this day-to-day and forget the bigger picture. What are the things that really matter if we found ourselves in a situation where we were confronted with our own mortality? If you were in my shoes, if you were sitting in that hospital bed, and maybe some of you have had that experience, what mattered to you? You know what? We're going to do an exercise right now. All of you have a piece of paper. I want everyone to take the backside of that piece of paper where it's a blank slate, or hopefully you've taken tons of great notes so far. And I would like you to write down what's important to you. If you found yourself confronted with a bad recovery, if you were starting to question if today was your last day. I know we all want to go to this wonderful afterlife, but it doesn't mean we don't appreciate and want to participate in the present life that we're in. So go ahead and jot down what's really important in your life right now. And I'm going to give you like 30 seconds to do that. So really write it down. No judgment, 1 thing, 10 things. What is the most important stuff in your life right now? Does anyone want to share an example of what you've written down? Yes. Yeah, I love that. Tell people you love them. That's great. Anyone else? Family. So my question to you guys is does your calendar match that list? And if it doesn't, pay attention. This is what we're working on today, right? It's very easy to get out of alignment. So that should also sort of dictate in this top 2 quadrants of important, those things that you wrote down. And some of them may be more urgent and some of them may not be. On that note, let's go to quadrant 2. So these are things that they're important, but they're not urgent. No one's making you do them. No one's holding your feet to the fire. You can procrastinate them all you want. What examples do we have of something that would be considered or not urgent, but also important? Retirement, love that. I'm going to make that a broad one, and we're going to call that planning. That can be retirement planning. That can be financial planning. That can be all sorts of planning, but just getting ahead of things, planning for your future. Absolutely great example. What else? Family, yes. Relationships. You know, we do have those emergency relationship times, but in theory, relationships are quadrant 2, personal or professional. I mean, have any of you guys said to yourself, I really need to call my sister, I need to call my sister, I need to call my sister, and you just keep pushing it off, right? It's easy to do that because there's nothing usually making you do that. You know, maybe some of you need to go out and build more professional relationships or build more relationships in the community, but no one is making you do that. So that would be a good example of quadrant 2. It's important, but it's easy to push off when you're really focusing on some quadrant 1 items, right? What else is quadrant 2? Professional development, I love that. So I'm going to make that a little more broad, and I'm going to lump it with self-care. A lot of us talked about self-care earlier today. Professional development, self-care, self-improvement. I grew up in a Japanese-American home, and there's a great Japanese concept called Kaizen, and it's essentially the word for continuous improvement, that we are put on this earth to get better each day. And that's something that no one's going to make us do. It's our choice to do that because it's very much a quadrant 2 item. It's important, but it's not urgent. Great example. Anything else for quadrant 2? Job responsibilities. Okay, so we're going to call this sort of, just job things. There's a lot of job things, and I'm even going to say life things. There's just a lot of things that we don't do. Tasks, projects, things that we can push off. We want to do them, they're important, but we just don't do them, right? You know, maybe it's organizing a closet, or it's putting a new system in place for work. Those are things that you know have a good return, but no one's forcing you to do them, so it's easy to push them off. I think we understand quadrant 2. You guys seem like you're really on top of this one. So any thoughts or questions so far on 1 and 2, the items above the important line? Okay. Thank you. Because someone brings it up every time, and it's always in a different spot. So I was kind of waiting to see where you guys would bring it up, especially since dinner is next. But usually, I've had a lot of people bring it up here. So we've had a lot of people sometimes bring it up here. So what I like to do is we're going to go ahead and put it right here, and it kind of touches all of them. Depends where you are in that moment. You know, sometimes we have hanger, and food is important and urgent, but sometimes it's not a top priority. So thank you. Someone had to bring it up. I'm glad you did. Naps? Well, it depends, honestly. Sometimes naps are a quadrant 1. It really just depends how your day is going. So, and that's the fun thing about this matrix, is it's a great way to reflect on the demands for your time and just sort of see what season you're in or what your day might look like. And again, I talk about seasons a lot. Sometimes we're in a season where we're really heavy loaded with quadrant 1, and sometimes we're really heavy loaded with quadrant 3. And it's just sort of, these are not hard and fast rules. If you're someone who's like, no, food is always Q1, and I'm not really interested in anyone else's opinion, like that's fine. That's your opinion, this is for you, and to use in your days. So, great question. Let's talk about quadrant 3. So quadrant 3, these are items that are urgent, but you would not consider them important. Email, okay. So sometimes unnecessary emails, phone calls, telemarketing things, solicitous things that are just more a nuisance, right? Or reply all. I'll just go ahead and tell you, technically professional etiquette is to not reply all. You should reply to the sender only unless there's a reason to reply all. So just go ahead and take that information with you and spread it out to the masses. So email, sure. Unnecessary emails, phone calls. Meetings for meeting's sake. Those are all sort of things that are urgent. They require your attention, but they're not getting you to your goals. They're not moving you to those things that you wrote down that you said were important. What else? Yeah, you can do social media here. So, let's make that more broad. Let's call that push notifications. So social media, a lot of people, unfortunately, the world with apps is it defaults to sending you a notification. I'll tell you, here's like a mini tip in this. I would encourage all of you to go into your devices, your computers and your cell phones, and try to cut out as many notifications as you can. Change those settings. So even if you still want an alert to pop up, you can get rid of the sound. So there's a lot of things you can do with your devices so that you're not being constantly interrupted with things in Q3 like social media or unnecessary emails.
Why is that urgent?
If you have a notification, I would call it urgent. But this one also, really, social media could also be here. Now, I know the marketing people are like, what? That should be above the important line. But you know what? Sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. It can be helpful to go on there and see that someone has had a new baby, so you can congratulate them. But sometimes we default to this mindless scrolling, especially people who spend tons of time in Q1. If you are someone who feels like your life is Q1, you're most likely to be one of those rubber banders to Q4, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is a lot of unnecessary scrolling and mindless, just sort of time sucks. So what else in Quadrant 3? I'll be the one to say it. I like to call this, in this quadrant, there are other people's problems. Right? You know what I'm talking about? I'm willing to be the one to say it and point it out. Sometimes we have things that are suddenly urgent in our world, but they're really not that important to us. It's, what's the quote? Poor planning on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on my part. I think we all heard that in grade school. I love that people are like, yes, yes. Yeah, so it really can be difficult for us to manage ourselves when people around us aren't doing a great job managing themselves. So other people's problems can be a burden because they're often urgent, but they're not always in alignment with the goals and the items that we want to be focusing on. I'm sure, especially in your line of work, that there are some difficulties managing that, so we can certainly, let's try to leave some time for Q&A and we can talk about that. So I'm also going to put on here what we also talked about, which is interruptions. Right, so interruptions, push notifications, emails, other people's problems. If you work in an open office environment or a place where people have access to you, people coming to visit. If you work at home, perhaps it's someone knocking on your door. I had this great little girl in my neighborhood who used to sell every week. It was a new entrepreneurial endeavor for her, and as a business owner, I wanted to support her, but it was, today it's snow cones, and then it's cupcakes, and so it was very much interruptions constantly. So those are sort of our Quadrant 3 items. They're requiring our attention, but they're not really moving us to where we want to be. Does that make sense, everyone? Any questions on Q3? Okay, so we kind of touched on Q4, but let's go ahead and talk about this. This is not urgent and not important. So we talked about unnecessary scrolling can be part of this. What else do we think is, it's not urgent, it's not important? Sure. Video games, we can put that in there. Now again, someone in this audience might be saying, but video games for me are self-care. Cool. For me, one episode of Cheers is self-care. 12 episodes is Q4, right? So let's go ahead and talk about that. What else? Not urgent, not important. How about toxic relationships, gossip, drama? I'm sure we've all experienced things like that where you're just like, I don't want to be part of this conversation. This is not where I want my life to go. Because remember, things that are getting your attention and your time, that's your life. So we'll just say gossip or drama. Any other thoughts on Q4? Shopping? That's another one that moves with food. So how about we'll call this like, how do we make this broad? Yeah, or let's call it things that we want to do, like escapes. Because sometimes for people, they're shopping because they're escaping, right? They don't want to deal with the pressures. So escapes or hiding, right? We're just trying to not face the world. and we're hiding in shopping or scrolling, or unfortunately, this tends to be a lot of Q4. All right, so here's my question. We're not judging each other here. Where do you guys think you currently spend the most time? 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, okay. Anyone else? Are you guys all pondering this? Okay. So let me ask you another question. Where do you think you should spend the most time? 2. I'm hearing 2. Yeah. So here's the thing. We've already said this is not important. So why would we give our precious finite time to it? This is something that, again, we've said is not important. These are things that put us in fight or flight. Unfortunately, our body doesn't know the difference between stress over a deadline or stress over a bear. So we react the same way physically, and that is one of the reasons that we have a lot of issues with physical health these days, with blood pressure, with chronic obesity, with anxiety and depression. These are results of us living in a Q1, Q4 life, right? So we are not designed to be in fight or flight all the time. So this is also the difference between us living reactively versus proactively. When we can work in a Quadrant 2 situation, we get to think more clearly. We get to have more time to produce better quality work and better outcomes. So let's talk about some of these. So we've already said we would want to cut that out. If you're saying it's not important, don't spend your time doing it, right? If people always say, if this was your last day on earth, what would you do with it? And that's a tough question because people are like, well, I still have to go to work. But would you do these things, right? So I want you to say, if it's something you would call Q4, just cut it out. Remember that your time is finite, right? So you don't have time to waste. Then we want to think about Q3. Some of these are things you can control. Adjusting notifications, communicating with people about expectations, perhaps trying to find ways to deflect other people's problems, finding other resources for them. So these are things we can try to adjust. So then what do we do with these two? Well, this, for example, this technically doesn't ever have to become a Q1. Because a lot of deadlines, we know in advance. Very rarely does a deadline come up right now. Oftentimes we have a little bit of notice. And our actions are the things that move it from a Q2 to a Q1, right? So getting more proactive with that. Kind of the same here with these basic needs. We can be more proactive with that, and we can keep those from becoming urgent. Now, unplanned and unforeseen things or emergencies, we're just always going to have to call those a Quadrant 1 issue. We're never going to know when we're going to blow a tire. Now, again, with that example, we could stay ahead of the maintenance on our vehicle and prevent it from being a Q1. Past me, again, the train wreck that was past me, I'm going to tell you guys that once I was on the side of the road and I ran out of gas. Literally drove until there was no gas in the car as an adult with a full-time job, a career. So that didn't have to happen. I created that Quadrant 1 situation because I didn't get gas proactively because I didn't pay attention to the gas light. So oftentimes, what are the gas lights in our lives? They're showing us that we're about to head to a Q1. Does that make sense? So we want to make sure we're paying attention to those warning signs. So we're being proactive. So if we can do that, then what this does is this gives us more time in Q2, and it helps us to be more available for Q1. So let's imagine that we have a day where there's just a lot on us. We've got meetings, we've got deadlines, we've got bills to pay, we forgot to get a gift for a birthday party that we have to go to this evening, and then on top of that, now suddenly we have an actual Q1 situation, a flat tire, or a car accident. Think about how much more stress that adds versus if we are more proactive with the other options, and then when we have that car accident or that flat tire, then we can be more present in that solution. Or if we have that sick child, it doesn't turn our whole day upside down. Have you guys ever had those days where one thing just takes the whole house of cards down? I have. So the whole thing with this Eisenhower matrix is to help you prioritize the demands for your time. So what I really would encourage you to do is when you leave here this week, take some time and reflect on your time. Like, make this quadrant for your life and write down what's falling into each quadrant. and do an evaluation on where you're spending the most time. What questions do we have on this before we move on? Did we nail it? You guys totally love this matrix, right? Did you have a question?
I do. Quadrant 4 seems to be a natural place for self-care items to come up. And I know we said, well, if I'm watching 12 episodes of Cheers, it's no longer self-care. But what if that amount of time with the amount of exhaustion, what if there's more of a ratio there? What if that is self-care for someone? Just eliminating Quadrant 4 actually eliminate space for self-care if it's too critical?
No, I think that's a great question. So the thing about it is you're the one who's determining when you cross that threshold from self-care to the point of diminishing returns, to use an economic principle. That's where you hit a point where the work you're putting in is no longer producing value. It's now starting to take away. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? So like, if 12 episodes of Cheers is still what you need in that particular week, by all means take 12. But maybe you hit 13 and you're like, yeah, I kind of feel like I need to get off the couch. It's really up to you. That's why what we can talk about are generalities, but this is really a framework for you to apply it to your specific life. And again, I mentioned seasons. You might be in a season where you need a lot more. Maybe you need scrolling every day. Maybe you just want to look at food on Instagram. I'm not sure. You might just need something different because that's a season and that's how you're coping. The important part is, though, that you try to balance these quadrants, that you make sure that that we are spending enough time in the things that you've identified as important, and not spending all of your time in a 1-4 situation. A lot of people who feel their life is very Quadrant One, very reactive, a term I used earlier today, shooting the snakes closest to you first. A lot of times when that's your life, you spend a lot of time in Q4, not because it's self-care, but because you just can't cope. You just are so overwhelmed that you don't have the bandwidth to focus on Q2. And you barely have the bandwidth to address Q3.
So when does that point come where self-care goes into 4, that it doesn't become a Q1 emergency with depression or something like that?
I think that's kind of a moving target. I don't have a rule that says this is when you've moved from Q2 to Q1. It's kind of a case by case.
The reason I asked that is because somebody was really mediocre in self-care, and they spent a lot of time doing things that were not productive, and then come to find out they were actually experiencing depression.
Yes, and this is why Q2 matters. Because what could have helped that? This. Because this could have helped if we're talking to people, if we're observing people, if we're paying attention to the people around us. Again, I reference past me, the train wreck a lot, but I could not be bothered by the people around me. I was not a good contributor. I was not a good teammate. I was not a good friend or wife or coworker because I was so consumed with my own inability to manage myself that I wasn't aware. The great thing about time management is when we do it well, it gives us the freedom to pay attention to the people next to us because we're not stressed out in our own way, that we can spot things like that we can ask questions, that we can be proactive with relationships and reach out to someone and say, hey, how you doing? Like, you want to go get coffee? Does that make sense? Does that sort of help answer that?
Absolutely. That was one of the concerns I had was noticing something like this, them not noticing themselves.
Yeah.
Because they were living in it, but it took a lot to get them to realize this was not helping.
And here's one of the hardest things I've learned in my line of work is that I can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped, and that's really defeating. When all is said and done, I think we all have to have our surgery. I was going to be a workaholic until I figured out the importance of not being a workaholic. Another thing I referenced this morning, but for those who weren't in there, I believe that life is a simple formula that success equals mindset plus habits. You have to want to live a better life. You have to decide to live a better life, and then it's habits. It's planning every week. It's talking to people. It's putting systems in place. But if you don't want it, that it doesn't matter. There's probably someone in this room who really is already checked out of this conversation because they don't want it. But there are people in this room who are like, I'm ready to live better. I want to spend more time with my community, with my loved ones, with my faith. And then those are the people who will go out and will be able to make these changes. But you know, it's hard for us to help people who don't want to help themselves. But it's good for us to be able to manage ourselves in a way that we can try, we can at least see, we can be observant, and offer to help them. That's a really good question, though. Did you have a question?
I was thinking of myself in my time, but then the church has its formula too, and then family, and then all of that. So, is there a way that you can sort of mesh? In my mind, sometimes it's not just one graph, but I'm dealing with three or four graphs.
Yeah, you could certainly do that.
I mean, I don't want to, but is there a?
I would encourage you to do a time audit. So for all of you, like I said, you can take, there's two different ways to do that. You can write down all the places, all the things that have taken your time for the past week. Just write down, just log your time. And then you can go through and you can categorize 1, 2, 3, 4. Which quadrant did they fall in? If that's a better method than writing the thing and then filling them in, is just log your time, and then after a week of logging your time, write out 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if you're logging that time, you can see how many personal things were quadrant 1, or how many work things were 2. Does that make sense? And that would be a good way to do that time audit.
I saw him do that 30 years ago.
It's probably time to do it again. Yeah, that's what I would encourage you to do. And we should always be reflecting and measuring on our time. It's sort of one of the things I think is a travesty is time is one of our most valuable resources. And we don't treat it as such, and we don't receive the training that we need to manage such an important thing. We can always make more money, but we can never make more time. So it's perplexing to me that we're not teaching and encouraging and supporting each other in a good way to manage such a gift. But I'll get off my soapbox, because we have a lot more to cover. So, any other questions on the Eisenhower matrix? Okay, we're going to talk about a couple other things that are helpful when identifying the priorities for your time. Where should your time go? So, who has a job description? Does anyone have a job description? Show of hands. Some of you. Ooh, not a lot of you. So, a job description is a useful tool to determine where your time should be going. Many people receive a job description during a hiring process, and then they never look at it again. But a job description is often the agreement you've made with your employer on what you will be doing. So if you often feel like you're doing all sorts of work that really doesn't seem to be work you should be doing, read your job description, have a discussion with whomever you report to about, are these still the things that I should be doing? And that's sort of a helpful guide of where your time should be going. Outside of the workplace, goals. What did you write down when we talked about your life? What's important to you? That should be where your time should be going. Your calendar should line up with your priorities. So if you were finding yourself with the freedom to choose how you spend your time, where do you want to spend that? And that's, what are your goals? Are there things you want to accomplish? With that, do you have other metrics, whether it's in a professional setting or in a life setting, that is measuring what you would call success? What are those metrics, and how does that line up with where you're spending your time? So again, outside of the Eisenhower matrix, we can use job descriptions, we can use performance metrics, we can use personal goals, we can use personal milestones. Those are all things that help us identify where should our time be going. So I'm going to give us just a simple example. If I have a goal to run a 10K, then for me, a good use of my time, something that would probably be considered quadrant 2, would be maybe running a couple times a week, right? So that would be a good use of my time. It would be a priority because it lines up with that goal. Any other questions on priorities? Okay. So, I'm going to take you back to my story for a minute. So, I mentioned sort of this epiphany, this realization that where I was spending my time was wrong, and that I didn't understand life, and that I was pretty much working my days away and not spending time with my loved ones or practicing self-care or really spending any time in Quadrant 2. And I made the commitment that I need to change this. I'm young enough, I have the opportunity, it's time to spend more time with my loved ones, it's time to do the things that matter, that God's got to have a better purpose for me, so I've got to figure out what that is. But remember, I mentioned that part where my husband is a fireman. So I was like, so I can't just quit work and just spend every day playing with my nieces and nephews and doing vacations and all of that. No, I had to work. Because for many of us, work is a necessity. But life is still a priority. So how do we do that? And that's what brought me to the second tip we're going to cover today, which is planning. So planning is one of the best ways we can shift our lives from reactive Quadrant 1 to proactive Quadrant 2. So by show of hands, who makes a plan in your life regularly? Who are my planners? That's a good amount. That's great. So of you who make plans, how many of you make a plan on paper? That's really good. I mentioned this earlier, but we remember more, we write it down. That's just sort of where we've evolved to. At some point, it's possible that we'll move away from that, but because of the multiple senses that are used in writing, it helps us to actually remember more and retain more information, which is one of the reasons I encourage people to plan on paper. The other nice thing about planning on paper is it gives us a very real connection with the finite nature of time. A piece of paper is only so big, and you'll see on the sheet that you have, those boxes for each day are only so big. That is similar to our actual 24 hours in each day. So a lot of people, who are my digital planners? Who does all your planning on a digital calendar, like a Google Calendar or something like that? Okay. And I believe in digital reinforcement, and we'll talk about that. One of the reasons I deter people from planning exclusively digitally is because our Google Calendar or Outlook calendar would let us put 900 things on a day. But we don't have the ability to execute 900 things on a day. So there's great value in putting our paper in a small box. I don't know about you guys, but one of my issues was I had no boundaries and I had no sense of saying no. And so I would overextend myself and overbook myself because I was optimistic and I saw all the possibility and I wanted to say yes to everything. Unfortunately, that set me up for failure because I overextended myself regularly. So if any of you are feeling chronically overextended, if you are the people who each day you're finding yourself thinking, oh, I just have so much to do. I don't understand why I have so many things to do in this day and I'm behind and I'm stressed out. You may want to consider planning your days on a month view calendar with a small box because that will sort of force some boundaries. It'll sort of be some self-trickery to managing your time better. So we want to plan on paper, and I want us to talk about, we're going to talk about when we should plan. So for those of you who said you plan on paper, how many of you do that every day? Okay, good. How many of you do that every week? Okay, how many of you do that every randomly when you feel that you need it? Okay, that's good too. All planning is good planning. Also, I'm going to go ahead and say this because a lot of times people are like, planning is too rigid. I don't want to do that. So think about it like a spectrum. Here's our most rigid planning, and here's our not planning at all. We need to be somewhere on this spectrum. Planning is freedom. Discipline is freedom. And so being able to have some version of a plan is good. So I'm going to give you some tips for planning. You may not want to do everything that I say, but remember that when you plan, you are being intentional about how you spend your time, and it helps you, again, to spend time in Quadrant 2, to spend time with the things you wrote down on your sheet were important. So planning does help you get to that life you want. So let's first talk about, this is interesting. I often do this training and I talk about Sunday scaries, but I'm wondering how many of you work on Sunday. And I don't know if the Sunday scaries are the same. So maybe you can enlighten me. So for many people that I work with who work a Monday through Friday job, Sunday morning rolls around and for about 3.5 minutes, people have joy. And then that quickly turns into crushing anxiety because they are stressed about all the things they didn't get done, and the next week is starting and they're already behind. What does that look like in the life of clergy? Saturday scaries? Okay. Everyday scaries? Okay. Okay, so typically, I encourage people to make a plan every Friday. So I have worked with some pastors before, and we have shifted it to Thursday. So we can talk about Thursday. The thing is, what we want to do is we want to find the end point of our week. So if for you that tends to be Thursday versus Friday, then that's a time when I would encourage you to implement what is called a weekly wrap-up. So you would want to set aside, let's call it 30 minutes to start with each week. And in that 30 minutes, you would want to sit in a place where you can be happy. Maybe that's a patio, maybe that's your office. You would want to probably, I encourage people, play music that makes you happy, get your favorite coffee drink, and you want to create a positive environment where you can tie up sort of the loose ends from your week and plan your coming week. So does this seem like that would be a Thursday activity for clergy? Maybe? Kind of. Okay, that can be a moving part, but let's just call it weekly planning. You want to do your weekly wrap-up, and in that time, you want to sit down and write a plan for the week ahead, and that will eliminate those Saturday scaries, because instead of stressing, you now have a plan that you simply have to work. Plan your work and work your plan is really what we're talking about here. So to help talk about some effective steps for planning, by show of hands, who are the people in here who would consider yourself to have a morning peak performance time? So first thing in the morning, you're on fire, you're crushing it. You're like, give me the hardest tasks, okay? Who are my midday peak people? Okay, who are my nighttime peak people? Okay, great. So knowing what you've just told me, during your peak performance time, you should be working on your most important and or most difficult tasks. So now let's have a conversation about introvert-extrovert styles. So it is a very commonly misunderstood definition. People often think, oh, if you're social, you're an extrovert, and if you're shy, you're an introvert. It's not really what that means. Introvert-extrovert is how our energy is used and recharged. So introverts tend to drain from what they perceive as stimulation, and extroverts recharge from what they perceive as stimulation. So it could be interpersonal stimulation. It could be environmental stimulation. It could be auditory or other sensory stimulation. So who in here would consider yourself an introvert? Stimulation drains you. Okay, and who are the extroverts? Okay, great. So what you would want to think about when you're planning each week is which tasks, how do you manage your energy throughout the day? So for example, if I am a morning peak performance person and I'm an extrovert, I want to do the things that are most important and most difficult first thing in the morning during my peak performance time. And for me, those are things that are less stimulating. So that's sitting at my computer. It's writing proposals. It's perhaps sending client follow-up notes versus the things that are more stimulating for me, like talking with clients or giving presentations. Those are things I would want to do when I start to experience a dip in my energy so that they will help bring my energy up. So each of us have, through our day, a peak, a trough, and a rebound. So what we want to do there is do our most important tasks during the peak and then our most energizing tasks during the trough. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So now what I want you to spend 5 minutes doing is we are going to practice making a plan. Actually, first let me go ahead and give you some steps. Are we okay to let go of this? I think this is recorded. I know this was like a really fun exercise that all of you guys are going to blog about moving forward, but we're going to go ahead and take this away and move on to our next piece here. So during your weekly planning sessions, that might be Friday, might be Thursday, you're going to make a written plan, because we remember more when we write it down, and we accomplish more when we cross it off. And the steps for weekly planning are start with what you know, then add what you hope, and then do digital reinforcement. So each of you have a sheet that has the days of the week, right? So it looks something like this. And we are going to just give an example. So when you would sit down in your weekly planning session, you would start with what you know. What time have you already given away? So for example, you might have Sunday, let's call it 9 to 12, you're at church. Maybe every Monday at 6 p.m., you have a small group. Maybe every Tuesday night at 6 p.m., your child has soccer. Maybe this particular week at 8 a.m., you have a doctor's appointment. Do you see what I'm doing here? We're merging personal and professional, so you only have one thing to manage, and we're starting by putting things that would happen. This is a symbol of your day, right? Things that would happen in the morning, times that you've already given away. So that's step one, what you know. Then we would go back and we would fill what you hope is going to happen. So in theory, you'd fill this out completely and you'd have some white space. So this is where you'd then say, what are the things that I want to do that the time is not already given away? So let me fill some of this out better for you. So we would have, I'm going to just use rudimentary things here, 8, and then maybe here we're another 8 at work, and then we're coming in late, so this day we're 9. All right, and then this is a normal day. Except maybe here we have a meeting at 4 o'clock. Okay, and then, so next we'd say, what do we hope we can do, right? So the first thing I mentioned is we want to do weekly planning. So maybe this is something that happens for you on Thursday morning. I would encourage you to identify a symbol, a star, a smiley face, a dot, that identifies important things. There's a thing that happens in us called synaptic pruning, and it sort of helps us to trim away things we're not using and focus on things we use regularly. So if we are always designating important things with a star, that is a way for our brains to say star equals important. So I can't teach you how to make more time. All I can teach you is to be efficient with the time you have. So simple things like that, where we can focus on always using the same symbol for a to-do list, that is going to help us over time to be more efficient in our days. So make your weekly plan, and maybe here is, let's see, something we might do. Call your sister, and then maybe here you would want to prep for the meeting, right? So step 1, what you know. Step 2, what you hope. Step 3 is digital reinforcement. Now, what in this plan do other people need to know? And that's where you might send a calendar invite. That's where you might send an email. You might send over an agenda or a text message. And this is how you would execute a weekly planning session each week. What I'd like you guys to do is spend 5 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes, and I want you to just do this for one day. So if you have an idea of where this week is going, let's go ahead and take some time to write out your plan for the week on that sheet that I gave you. And then if you have any questions while you're doing that, let me know. Again, step 1, what you know. Step 2, what you hope. Questions are we seeing so far? What items are you like, listen, this is why this doesn't work for me? It's possible that the person next to you has the same issue. Okay, so you guys love weekly planning already. That's good. So the theory here is that, yeah, did you have a question?
Can you talk a little bit about the hope category?
Oh, what you hope to do? Yeah, great question. So I first talked about the time you've already given away. Commitments you've already made. You know, that's your doctor's appointments, your work commitments, meetings, things that happen at a set time. What you hope to do, those might be personal things. That might be self-care. That could be items in Quadrant 2. So maybe that's a particular work project. It's prep for something. It's helping you to get ahead of the deadlines, and it's the things that you want to spend your time doing. Does that make sense? So it can be a yoga class, or it can be, I want to go ahead and start working on this project because it's not due for 2 weeks, and I want to be ahead of it. They're the things that aren't necessarily time-bound yet. They're floaters. Good question. And the theory behind this is that when we plan this way, these boxes represent our 168 hours for the week. And when we start with what we know, that tells us what we've already given away, right? We know what of that 168 is already gone and what is happening at set times. Then we, in theory, would have white space. And that's where we want to fill that space with the things that we then hope to accomplish and hope to do. Where do we want to spend the rest of our time? With that, too, I usually encourage people, if you have this block where you know you're working for the day, work, you can put those tasks that you hope to do here. So maybe this is sermon planning, right? And that's something that you want to do during your peak performance time. So that's the first thing you're going to do when you get to work that day. Or maybe you need to remember to call Kim and check on her. She's been in the hospital. The point here is that we're not hoping necessarily to do things. We're taking the things that we hope to do and we're committing to doing them. We're making them part of our day and we're ensuring that we get those things accomplished. We were not built to just retain everything in our brain. The helpful thing about making systems like this and creating plans is it helps us to then show up for those things in the best version of ourselves. It keeps us from having to manage too many things and have friction and interference in our days. And it helps us to simply look at our plan and move through it. So the sheets that you have, the nice thing about those sheets is they're designed so that once you write that plan, it folds down so you only are looking at one day at a time. So then you have your entire week planned, but you only have to focus on that one day, and you can be fully present in that day and in each of those moments. What other questions do we have about planning? Yes?
I love to plan, and I love to write down my plans. I just don't follow any of my plans.
That is a great question. So her question was, she loves planning, but she doesn't follow her plans. So that will bring us a little bit into our next topic, but let's go there. So I had my surgery. I learned the secret was planning, was managing my time, and then I had a plan one day. I was at work. I had a morning appointment, and so I was planning to leave early and go to my nephew's cross-country meet. So right before, 10 minutes before I'm supposed to walk out the door, my boss comes in, and she says, "Hey, we have a walk-in. Can you handle that?" And suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And out of nowhere, I don't know where it came from, I just said, no. She was like, cool, I'll have Jacob do it. And that was it. And I had spent my entire life thinking that I couldn't protect my plan, that I couldn't say no. So this is why I bring this up now, is we've taken the time to identify what's important. We've talked about ways to strategically put those things into our lives, into our days, and ensure that they happen. It is on us to protect that plan. So we can definitely talk about the things that force you to change that plan. Like, why are you not following through with your plan, would be my question to you. But when all is said and done, this is a 3-step plan. It's a 3-step process. We know what's important, we determine when we'll do what's important, and then we follow through on that and we protect what's important. So let me ask you, why do you feel like you're not following your plans?
And I don't want to do it.
Okay, so let's go back to that success formula. You're tired and you don't want to do it. I think obligation is the worst reason to do anything. Because if our time is short, why are we even messing around with things that are an emphatic heck yes?
It's my children.
Oh. Okay, so you might have to dial into this one and troubleshoot it a little more. So what I would tell you is if you are having trouble executing a plan, especially something like that, so first of all, if we're having trouble executing a plan, the first thing I would tell you is to ask yourself, is this worth my time? So let's put the kid example aside for a minute. We took time to say what's important in our lives. So that is why we start there. Because then when we have demands on our time, we can say, does this line up with my goals, with my performance metrics, with my job description? Does this line up with what I said was important? If the answer is yes, it gets my time. If the answer is no, it doesn't get my time. I'm going to assume your children's well-being is in alignment with what you said. Okay. However, if that's still difficult for you to deal with, then we would want to start being proactive about why you are not executing that plan. So I'm going to share a story that I actually learned about from Troy in church, but I'm going to do a twist on it. So, can someone name something that cannot swim? A rock? I love that. Thank you. So let's pretend we're all together and we're standing on the side of a river, and a rock floats by. Or was it the rock? A rock or the rock? A rock. Okay. And rocks float in this scenario, by the way. So we're all together on the side of the river, and a rock floats by. And I jump in and I grab the rock and I fish it out. And here comes another rock. And at this point, Troy jumps in and he grabs the rock and fishes it out. And then here comes the rock. And someone says, oh my gosh, we gotta get the rock out. And you jump in and fish it out. And then I start to walk away. And you say to me, where are you going? I'm gonna go upstream and stop the person who's throwing the rocks in the water. Right? Does that make sense? This is what John Maxwell said is essential. We do not need to be hacking at the branches. We need to be addressing the roots. So for those of you who are having problems executing your plans, it's time for us to dig a little bit deeper into that and say, what is the root problem? And whether that's you choosing to not execute your plan or someone else constantly changing your plan, we need to be proactive in identifying the upstream problem. What can we solve? So can we bring this back to your kids? This is a very helpful example. So is there an upstream solution that you can implement that will help you to follow through on the plans that involve your children? That's great. That's a great example. So if you're saying, I'm tired and I'm not able to follow through on all the plans, a proactive solution could be when you make your plan for the week and you see, this is a long day and I'm not going to be a good mom this day. Can you proactively say, hey, grandparents, can you tap in? This is the beauty of planning, is it gives us a bird's eye view of the life we're about to live for that next week, what we're going to do. And instead of reacting to it in the day-to-day, realizing at 4 o'clock you're so tired and you still have 4 more hours to go, this is when you would look at it and you would say, you know what, Tuesday looks like it's going to be a bear. I should call in reinforcements. I should think upstream about it. Does that sound like something you can solve? We can keep blowing holes through it. This is what's helpful. That would help you work your plan? Okay. Oh, I think so, but I think that when we work in that reactive fashion, that's when we're living in Q1. That's when we're in that fight or flight. That's when we're not functioning at our highest level of contribution. That's when we move very quickly from an asset to a liability. So again, there's such value in working proactively and managing our time so that we are going through our days proactively versus reactively. It's not just so we can accomplish more. It's so that we can participate and be present and enjoy the time we spend with our children versus feel like a drained parent. So we just covered a lot. We went a little bit off the agenda. So let me bring this back around for us. So planning each week is our opportunity to ensure that our priorities, the things that we said are important, become part of our days. It's a way for us to be proactive instead of reactive. It's a way for us to bring self-care into our lives. It's a way for us to build relationships and to build lives of meaning. There are lots of tactics on how we do that. We maximize our peak performance time. We pay respect to our introvert-extrovert styles. We work off energy as humans. So I said this earlier, so for those of you who didn't hear it, we would not use our cell phone 24/7 without recharging it. So we cannot do that to ourselves. We have to build rest and recharge into our days and into our weeks. By sitting down each week and mapping out just one bite of it, one of our weeks for the year, one of the weeks for our life, we get to look at it in a proactive way, and we get to say, where am I setting myself up for success? Where am I setting myself up for failure? Where can I strategically place my tasks so that I am able to get things done in a way that helps me provide my highest level of contribution, in a way that helps me to be joyful in my days? And then, once we have that plan, we have to protect that plan. So that is on us to respect our own time. It's on us to say no. Who's comfortable saying no, by the way? Okay, great. That's pretty good. So for those of you who are not comfortable saying no, another option is saying not now. So sometimes that's a little bit easier because it leaves the door open. So if someone asks you to do something and you're at capacity, you can simply say, I appreciate the invitation. I'm at capacity this week. Could you ask me again next week? And nobody's feelings are hurt, and it's okay, and you are not the bad guy. So not now is another option for those who aren't comfortable saying no. However, I will remind you that in a world of finite time, saying yes to something is saying no to something else. So you're simply needing to choose what you want to say no to and what you want to say yes to. One of my favorite ways to think about this is if it is not a heck yes, then it's a no. You know, I mentioned this, that the life's too short for mediocre. So I believe this is not just how we spend our time. I like to think about this in the food we eat, in the clothes we wear, in the music we listen to. If it's not something that is a 10 out of 10, making your life really happy, maybe see if you can get rid of it. So I know that sounds a little bit harsh, but again, life is short. We need to really live it up and enjoy it. So what questions do we have on this? I've got another couple nuggets we can talk about, but I really want to make this beneficial for you. So where are you guys still hung up? What do we still need to work through? Yes.
Is there a better calendar, digital calendar to use than Outlook?
Tell me, when you say better, in what way? Like?
Is there a better view?
View.
A few minutes ago, you almost referred to a view, like instead of looking at it by day, you might look at it by month.
By month.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a better display?
The best display is a paper calendar. So I'm serious when I say the best, yeah. So during my recovery, I went on a mission. I was like, I'm going to find the best solution to time management. So every day during my lunch break, I would go to Target or Office Depot or scour the internet. I would try every app. I would try every planner. And what I concluded was none of them were great. There is no magic bullet. It is a bigger problem to solve. It's a lot of different pieces. I also learned in my time doing this and life beyond is that each person is different in the time management tools that work for them. I'm very biased, and I believe that the best place to start is a month view calendar. So I created tools that I now sell in my business. So I'm biased, and I think the best calendar is an Origami Day planner, which is a 14-month calendar and a notebook in one, and it's a month view.
That we might be giving away here very shortly.
Actually, we will be. However, I'm not someone who wants to push my stuff on other people. So I know you can go to the Dollar Tree, and they typically will have a just plain month view paper calendar, and I would encourage that. Again, I think the order of operations should be paper then digital, using that digital to reinforce, because if we go digital first, then we really start to get into more, we start to think we have more time than we really do. However, you probably could set your Outlook to a month view, and I think it only holds like 3 or 4 things in a month view box, and then it'll push off and say like +5 or whatever. You could try to do that and just not let it push off, if that makes sense. It would make sense in the settings. And we could talk one-on-one about that too. But I'm very biased towards paper planning. It really has, in all the years that I have struggled with time management and succeeded in time management, it continues to be the best option. What other questions? Okay.
We've experienced a Quadrant One issue here in the late stages of the day with our caterer falling through, and they have changed, and we are going to have food, but that is en route. So we have extra time for a little bit of questions. I know it's coming. I swear it's coming. We're going to feed you. I don't want an angry mob.
And that is probably a good disclaimer, because they probably don't have questions if they think we're almost done.
Yeah,
But they might have questions
yeah.
if they have more time.
Yeah, you got a little bit more time. I know one of the books that Samantha and I have talked about, one of my favorites is out recently. Oliver Burkeman's written a book called 4,000 Weeks. And the idea behind that book is if you live 80 years, you get 4,000 weeks on this planet. And I know that's one of when you think of it finite like that, like, 4,000 weeks doesn't feel like a whole lot. And it makes me protect my time a whole lot more. And so that's one of the things I know I've read about that has challenged me to be a lot more protective of what it is, what I will give my time to and what I can have impact on. And the thing that, you think about who's going to remember us, where are we going to have our biggest impact, and it's always our families and our households and who we share our lives with.
And I think that was one of the best things that I learned during my recovery was that to my employer, I was important. And to people sort of in the periphery circles of my life, I was important, but not in the same way that I was important to my most inner circle, my family, to myself. And the fact that I thought I would be out of work for 4 weeks and then ended up being out of work for much longer and the world still turned, that was a very powerful lesson. Because a lot of us think we hold the world up on our shoulders and we can't step back. We can't have self-care. We can't take a day off because the whole thing will tumble down. When the reality is, for a lot of the things that we do on a regular basis, if we step back, it'll keep going. But it's those closest circles that if we were pulled completely out of it, that's where it wouldn't keep going. It wouldn't be the same. So I think that perspective is really critical when it comes to time management.
I think we know at the end of the day, you really want to be spending your time with, you want to go maybe where people know. People all know your name.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to go.
Yeah, where everyone
everybody
knows your name.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I had to.
Okay, so I have one more item I wanted to share with you guys because I think it might be helpful, and since we have the time. One thing that people struggle with is when someone else tells you where your time can go. Do you deal with that as clergy? Is that an issue? Oh, wow, okay. Okay. So now I'm glad we're going to talk about this. So let's talk about how we protect our plan when someone else is in control of our time. First of all, I think we should proactively try to give as few people control of our time as possible. This is another reason why I like paper planning. With a lot of people who work with digital calendars will sort of block time and give someone access to their calendar, and if there's an empty spot, someone will fill it. That's very dangerous because we're telling someone what they get to do with our most precious resource. So instead, I think it's good for us to create more boundaries around how we give out our time. However, let's say, Troy, since you're up here, let's just use this example. Let's say that Troy is my boss